morning, we will be reading an excerpt from The Secret of Chimneys by Agatha Christie. Through the open door, Virginia caught a glimpse of George Lomax in the hall, just being ushered upstairs by her butler, Chilvers. As the front door closed, Virginia called to him.
"Come in here, George. Chilvers, bring us tea in here, will you please?"
Virginia Revel was the 27-year-old widow of a former Czechoslovakian diplomat. She had a wonderfully expressive face, and there was a sort of radiant vitality about her that always challenged attention. It would have been quite impossible ever to ignore Virginia Revel. George Lomax was Virginia's cousin, a robust man. He was inclined to be fond of his own voice. He had a red face and protuberant eyes, and an immense sense of his own self-importance. He also had the unpleasant habit of retaining a hold upon a person with whom he was engaged in serious conversation, doubtless the result of long experience with people trying to make a mad dash for liberty from the garrulous politician. While Virginia was waiting for him to enter, she flung open both the windows. George Lomax came into the room to find her standing erect with dancing eyes and wind-blown hair.
"I'll shut them in a minute, George, but I felt the room ought to be aired. Did you follow me the blackmailer in the hall?"
The what?
Blackmailer, George. B-L-A-C-K-M-A-I-L-E-R. Blackmailer. One who blackmails.
My dear Virginia, you can't be serious.
Oh, but I am, George.
But who did he come here to blackmail?
Me, George.
But, my dear Virginia, what have you been doing?
Well, just for once as it happens, I haven't been doing anything. The good gentleman mistook me for someone else.
You rang up the police, I suppose.
No, I didn't. I suppose you think I ought to have done so.
George considered waverly.
Well, no, perhaps not. Perhaps you acted wisely. You might be mixed up in some unpleasant publicity in connection with the case. You might even have had to give evidence.
I should have liked that. I would love to be summoned, and I should like to see if the judges really do make all those rotten jokes you read about. It would be most exciting. I was at Vine Street the other day to see about a diamond brooch I'd lost, and there was the most perfectly lovely inspector, the nicest man I ever met.
George, as was his custom, let all irrelevancies pass.
But what did you do about this scoundrel?
Well, George, I'm afraid I let him do it.
Do what?
Blackmail me.
George's face of horror was so poignant that Virginia had to bite under her lip.
You mean? Do I understand you to mean that you did not correct the misapprehension under which he was laboring?
Virginia shook her head, shooting a sideways glance at him.
Good heavens, Virginia, you must be mad.
I suppose it would seem that way to you.
But why, in heaven's name, why?
Several reasons. To begin with, he was doing it so beautifully, blackmailing me. I mean, I hate to interrupt an artist when he's doing his job really well. And then, you see, I'd never been blackmailed.
Indeed, I should hope not.
And I wanted to see what it felt like.
I am at quite a loss to comprehend you, Virginia.
I knew you wouldn't understand.
You did not give him money, I hope.
Virginia spoke apologetically.
Just a trifle.
How much?
50 pounds.
Virginia!
My dear George, it's only what I pay for an evening dress, and it's just as exciting to buy a new experience as it is to buy a dress. More so, in fact.
George Lomax merely shook his head, and with Chilvers appearing at the moment with a tea urn, he was saved from having to express his outraged feelings. When tea had been brought in, and Virginia's deft fingers were manipulating the heavy silver teapot, she spoke again on the subject.
I had another motive too, George, a brighter and better one. We women are usually supposed to be cats, but at any rate, I'd done another woman a good turn this afternoon. This man isn't likely to go off looking for another Virginia Revel. He thinks he's found his bird all right. Poor little wretch. She was in a blue funk when she wrote that letter. Mr. Blackmailer would have had the easiest job of his life there. Now, though he doesn't know it, he's up against a tough proposition. Starting with the great advantage of having led a blameless life, I shall toy with him to his undoing. As they say in the books. Guile, George. Lots of guile.
George still shook his head. He persisted.
I don't like it. I still don't like it.
Well, never mind, George, dear. You didn't come here to talk about blackmailers. What did you come here for, by the way? Correct answer, to see you. Accent on the U. and press her hand with significance, unless you happen to be eating heavily buttered muffins, in which case it must all be done with the eyes.
I did come to see you, and I am glad to find you alone.
replied George seriously.
Oh, George, this is so sudden,
choked Virginia, swallowing a currant.
I wanted to ask a favor of you. I have always considered you, Virginia, as a woman of considerable charm.
Oh, George.
And also a woman of intelligence.
No, really? How well the man knows me.
My dear Virginia, there is a young man, arriving in England tomorrow, whom I should like you to meet. You could, if you chose, exercise your considerable charm.
Virginia cocked her head a little on one side.
George, dear, I don't charm as a profession, you know. Often I like people, and then, well, they like me. But I don't think I should set out in cold blood to fascinate a helpless stranger. That sort of thing isn't done, George. It really isn't. There are professional spies who would be much better at it than I should.
That is out of the question, Virginia. This young man, he is a Canadian, by the way, of the name McGrath.
A Canadian of Scottish descent.
She deduced brilliantly.
He is probably quite unused to the higher walks of English society. I should like him to appreciate the charm and distinction of a real English gentlewoman.
Meaning me?
Exactly.
Why?
I beg your pardon?
I said why. You don't boom the real English gentlewoman with every stray Canadian that sets a foot upon our shore. What is the deep idea, George? To put it vulgarly, what do you get out of it?
I cannot see that that concerns you, Virginia.
I couldn't possibly go out for an evening and fascinate unless I knew all the whys and wherefores.
You have the most extraordinary ways of putting things, Virginia. Anyone would think.
Wouldn't they? Come on, George, part with a little more information.
My dear Virginia, matters are likely to be strained shortly in a certain Central European nation. It is important, for reasons that are immaterial, that this Mr. McGrath should be brought to realize that the restoring of the monarchy of Czechoslovakia is imperative to the peace of Europe.
The part about Europe is all bosh,
said Virginia calmly.
but I'm all for monarchies every time, especially for picturesque people like the Czechoslovakians. So, you're running a king in the Czechoslovakian stakes, are you? Who is he?
George was reluctant to answer, but he did not see his way to avoid the question. The interview was not going at all as he had planned. He had foreseen Virginia as a willing, docile tool, receiving his hints gratefully and asking no awkward questions. This was far from being the case. She seemed determined to know all about it, and George, ever doubtful of female discretion, was determined at all costs to avoid this. He had made a mistake. Virginia was not the woman for the part. She might indeed cause serious trouble. Her account of her interview with the blackmailer had caused him grave apprehension. A most undependable creature with no idea of treating matters seriously.
Prince Michael Abalovich.
He replied, as Virginia was obviously waiting for an answer to her question.
But please, let me go no further.
Don't be absurd, George. There are all sorts of hints in the pages already, and articles cracking up the Abalovich dynasty, and talking about the murdered Nicholas IV as though he were a cross between a saint and a hero, instead of a stupid little man besotted by a third-rate actress that he was.
George winced. He was more than ever convinced that he had made a mistake in enlisting Virginia's aid. He must stave her off quickly.
You are right, my dear Virginia.
He said hastily, as he rose to his feet to bid her a hasty farewell.
I should not have made the suggestion I did to you, but we are anxious for the Dominions to see eye to eye on this Czechoslovakian crisis, and McGrath has, I believe, influence in journalistic circles. As an ardent monarchist, and with your knowledge of the country, I thought it a good plan for you to meet him.
So that's the explanation, is it?
Yes, but I dare say you wouldn't have cared for him.
Virginia looked at him for a second, and then she laughed.
George, you're a rotten liar.
Virginia!
Rotten, absolutely rotten. If I had your training, I could have managed a better one than that. One that had a chance of being believed. But I shall find out all about it, poor George. Rest assured of that. The mystery of Mr. McGrath. I shouldn't wonder if I get a hint or two at Chimneys this weekend.
At Chimneys? You're going to Chimneys?
George could not conceal his perturbation. He had hoped to reach Lord Caterham in time for the invitation to remain unissued.
Bundle rang up and asked me this morning.
George made one last effort.
Rather a dull party, I believe. Hardly in your line, Virginia.
My poor George. Why didn't you tell me the truth and trust me? It's still not too late.
George took her hand and dropped it again limply.
I have told you the truth.
He said coldly, and he said it without a blush.
That's a better one,
said Virginia approvingly.
It's still not good enough. Cheer up, George. I shall be at Chimneys all right, exerting my considerable charm, as you put it. Life has suddenly become very much more amusing. First, a blackmailer, and then George in diplomatic difficulties. Will he tell all to the beautiful woman who asked for his confidence so pathetically? No, he will reveal nothing until the last chapter. Goodbye, George. One last fond look before you go? No? Oh, George, dear, don't be sulky about it.
Virginia ran to the telephone as soon as George had departed with a heavy gate through the front door. She obtained the number she required and asked to speak to Lady Eileen Brent.
Is that you, Bundle? I'm coming to Chimneys all right tomorrow. What? Bore me? No, it won't, Bundle. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, so there. Thank you.